We got to talk about it. It's been all the news on all the stations and all the programs and all the platforms because it is so extensive and wide-ranging, and the impact is being felt globally. I was just before the show started watching a video of one of the leaders in Singapore making an address to his country's parliament about the impact of the Trump tariffs, because he was making the point that, well, Singapore actually does not have a trade imbalance. Well, they have a trade imbalance in the United States' favor, meaning that they import more from the United States than they export to the United States. And so he was making the point that in that case, if this is supposed to be reciprocal tariffs, then they should have zero tariffs for Singapore, zero additional tariffs, because there is no imbalance to the detriment of the US in that case. And that's the same for us here in Jamaica. We import way more from the United States than we export to them. So why did we get a 10% tariff as well? But we're going to be talking about it with our guest, chartered accountant Sainte Billings. She's been on the show before, and she's going to break it all down for us. Welcome back, Sainte. Great to have you.
Hi. Thanks for having me back.
And just to remind the viewers, Sainte is originally from Haiti, so she's a Caribbean sister living in the United States now.
Yes.
With that accounting degree. So first things first, break down what Donald Trump announced in his Liberation Day package.
I know you mentioned how interesting the name. So never thought of it like that, but yes. One thing
especially with you being from Haiti, huh?
I know, right? I need that same hype in May for Haitian Flag Day. But in any case, one thing I'll say is that this is no news to anyone. Donald Trump campaigned on this. He said once he gets back in power, he will be implementing those tariffs. He made many notes of it. Originally, he said he wanted to have it on April 1st, but he didn't want the world to think that it's April Fool's. So he made sure to have it on April 2nd. So essentially, according to Donald Trump, the goal for this is to encourage U.S. manufacturing and essentially encourage more to be done in the U.S. and for countries to be paying as much to us as we are paying abroad in order to do business with them. So that is the essential, I guess that's what he ran on, and that's the thought behind it. However, as you can see, there's been it's going to impact the people living here. It's not going to be just roses for people in the US or people abroad, and it's causing a bit of chaos. And we'll get into that. But essentially, one thing he said, everyone would start at least at 10%. That was the base that he mentioned, and it could go as high as, we're not sure, but right now we know China is 54%, and we'll be talking about Guyana, which we're seeing was at 38%. So we'll be getting into that a bit.
Right. So it's supposed to be reciprocal. But then the thing is, as I was thinking about it, Sainte, I understand the point. He wants to be protectionist. He wants to encourage local manufacturing. But it's not like American companies can open a manufacturing plant tomorrow. It's going to take them time to build those resources because in many cases they don't exist. Shouldn't this have been phased in? Like give them 2-3 years?
Yeah, that does sound good. But I think it's one of those things when you, as you can see in the first 100 days of Donald Trump, he's making a lot of changes from immigration. There's a lot of things, and some things are not really catching up at the same pace as is passing on those laws, and that's something we'll be discovering over time. However, I think one of the other things that he campaigned on was to reduce taxes for U.S. citizens, right? And part of that is making sure he increase that source of income somewhere else, and ideally would be externally. So the goal is, until we have, from my understanding, until we have those plants ready to go, these other countries will either pay up and in a way help us increase the U.S. economy until the U.S. plants are ready to go. So that is the thought process behind this.
Right. So, all right. So one of his goals, he said, or one of the things that he ran on his campaign is reducing taxes for U.S. citizens. But then don't these tariffs have the opposite effect, because they're going to drive up costs on parts, on anything that is imported to the United States, and which in turn will drive up inflation. And that's
Yeah.
something that we're all looking at closely.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the reasons he's considering a few tax breaks to somewhat try to make up for these gaps that people will be filling. I know recently there was an interview that he had, and he said sometimes you have to take the medicine. So he sees this as something temporary that the countries will abide, and essentially eventually the market will level up, right, or be more leveled. So yes, those essentially we won't see it in taxable income, but as you mentioned, inflation will be impacted. There will be it it will be felt not just globally but also locally for those living in the US. So I agree
So
with you there.
how is the US Federal Reserve reacting right now?
How, say it again, sorry.
The Fed, what has been the Fed's reaction?
Honestly, so it's mixed. We have some farmers, some people who are saying this is good. They're looking forward to more jobs being created. However, there is this fear in people. People are hesitant to. Some people are hesitant to continue investing. This is a very scary time for them because this hasn't been done and decades. So this is not something that people are taking lightly, even though the Trump administration wants to downplay it to say it's not that bad. This is just temporary. But the reaction has not been as peaceful as I'm sure he wasn't expecting it to be peaceful. He was expecting this to be a bit chaotic at first. So I don't think this is taking him by shock. However, people are behaving more hesitantly to get into the market, or as you mentioned in some of the videos before going live, is when prices are low, this is a good time for people to buy. But even with prices going low, people are still being hesitant because they're not sure if they should be holding on to their finances for dear life.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of reactions, especially from the markets. I saw one report saying that the past week has been the largest stock market fall off since COVID. So that's pretty dramatic. Why do you think the markets, particularly, and investors have reacted so strongly? Like, what's the connection between tariffs and stock prices?
Well, one thing, there's tariffs. Those things are not just added to those companies don't eat up those fees, right? They pass it on to the people buying. So people are expecting for finances to be tight. They're expecting, and some that we have job losses. There are a lot of things happening at the same time. People are losing their jobs. There are some layoffs happening, but also people are not. Cash is king. They don't want to let go of cash at a time where there's so much uncertainty. That's what I'm assuming.
So it's not that they've lost confidence in US companies, because ideally this is being done to protect US companies. It's just that they want cash right now because they're not certain about what's going to be happening in the future. And like you said, cash is king.
Cash is king. So people, even in debt, some people are holding back on paying off debt because they don't want to be in a position where they're homeless and there's nothing they can do while money's invested somewhere and they're not sure what's going to happen.
So let's talk about the impact here in the Caribbean. So in the introduction, I was mentioning that, okay, the tariffs are supposed to be reciprocal, but for most Caribbean countries, we import way more from the United States than we export to them. And then we have the case of Guyana that's being hit with this 38% tariff. Why is Guyana being targeted?
Yeah. So let's talk about it. So it in Trump's speech, it's noted that Guyana has some high rates that even on in Guyana's side, they're saying it's not necessarily so. So there are some discrepancies there, but I don't think it's directly related to what Guyana has charged U.S. in the past. I think well, not just people are looking into this, and there are two possibilities that I think are interesting enough to mention. One, this could be a political move, in a sense where Guyana is increasingly becoming one of the key players in oil. and oil export. And Trump has been talking about the golden liquid, right? So this may be a political move as a reaction to this shift in economy for Guyana. And another possibility that's worth mentioning is that Guyana may be looking into diversifying its ties, and this is a way to signal stick closer to the U.S. or face consequences. So these are not directly being stated out loud, but we know that Guyana has some ties with China, and this may be in a way to discourage them and have them pay attention. And the fact that they're becoming an increasingly key player for in the oil.
A lot of Caribbean countries have ties with China, substantial ties,
Yeah.
including here in Jamaica. You know, one thing that I saw this week, some analysis of these reciprocal tariffs, and I keep putting them in quotation marks because are they really reciprocal? They, the breakdown I was seeing, I don't remember which journalist it was from or which media house this person was from, but they were saying that how Trump actually arrived at the tariffs, or how his team actually arrived at the tariffs, is by looking at the trade imbalance. So it actually wasn't based on what I tax your goods. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, Trump has been saying, you tax me, I'll tax you back. Whatever you
Yeah.
tax me, I'll tax you back plus some. But
That's what he's.
the way
Mm-hmm.
that they actually arrived at the figures had nothing to do with what we tax you. It has to
Mm-hmm.
do with the trade imbalance, and then they divided it by two and added something or something to that effect. Is there
Yeah.
any truth to that? Like, how did they come up with the numbers?
So I don't know for sure, but I have heard this, and I think the number that, and this would make sense because from some of the numbers I've heard is that he mentioned that there's a 76% that Guyana has been, I guess, the imbalance for Guyana to the U.S. and the fact that is the rate that they're taxing Guyana is 38%. So there might be some truth to that, with, but I'd have to look into it more.
Mm. So, looking back at the stock markets there in the United States, we talked about investor confidence. We talked about what investors may be looking forward to. What are the opportunities that you see right now in the market?
Well, it's similar how you have it, and you've mentioned it a few times. This may be a good opportunity to buy low, right? Because prices are down, and some investors are banking on those moments. So people who have, I guess, excess cash. This is a time where they are jumping into the market and they are making leaps because there's been times where the economy has crashed and billionaires have been made in that time, right? So there are people taking leaps and for or taking advantage of this as such, with the hope that this will not remain forever and that we're gonna see the other side soon.
I saw a report probably yesterday that Warren Buffett is the only billionaire in the top 10 who has made money this year, who's in
Yeah,
the positive. And when you look at the other billionaires in that top 10, they're all entrepreneurs. So their businesses, the value of their businesses have declined, which means their net worth has declined.
yeah,
Warren Buffett is the only investor amongst that pile. And
yeah.
he sold off a bunch of stock in, I think it was in January.
Technology, yeah. But the thing with Warren Buffett, he's so I guess diversified, right? And he's very much focused on what are people what is it that people can't be without, and those are the things that he invests in. So those are things that it's recession proof a lot of times, that no matter what, if people have the funds, they will find it. If they don't immediately have it, they'll run their credit cards to purchase those things because those are things that they need to use anyway. Versus when I looked at, I heard this report, we consider the tech giants, they're heavily invested in that particular business. So I think that may play a role to Warren Buffett being the only one that somewhat came out on top for this.
And finally, Saint, what can we here in the Caribbean expect? Does this even impact us at all?
Yes, in a way, because one, it's going to reduce. the Caribbean, they're not the main players in that. They're just, regardless of tariffs, they're going to be exporting at the same rate. So exports will lower, and that will impact the people living there, right? Because that's less money coming back to the country. So I'm expecting some negotiations to be done, but I don't know if they'll be negotiating at the same rate as Canada or France or whatever, all those other countries. So it will be felt. And my hope is that we're able to get to a place where this blows out and certain reconsiderations are being done, because I know the negotiations are on the way. But I trust that it will be felt, because we can't play at the same pace as some of those other countries, and with a higher tariff, it will make it harder for us to get some of the pie.
Question coming from Taylor, who wants to know, is it a great time to invest in precious metals like silver and gold?
I'd say, I guess I'd say so, yeah. Because these things don't go away, and we know that it's been proven over time that these are somewhat recession-proof investments. So I definitely say yeah.
And keep in mind, this is not investment advice. This is intended
Yes.
as for educational purposes only. Standard disclaimer. Thank you so much, Sainte. It's always a pleasure to have you and your insights.
Thank you for having me.